Imagine being pulled over by a cop who thinks he holds all the power, but what he doesn't know is that the woman he's harassing is actually the new head of internal affairs. Tonight, his arrogance is about to backfire in the most shocking way. This is the story of how a racist officer was exposed, and how justice finally caught up to him. License and registration. Now. The barked command cracked through the night like a whip. The flashing red and blue lights behind Maya Johnson's car painted the dark street in pulses of color, making her heart beat faster, not from guilt, but from the weight of what she already suspected. She glanced up at her rearview mirror. The officer's face was partially hidden under his cap, but his scowl was unmistakable. His voice carried not just authority, but contempt. Maya, a black woman in her early 30s, inhaled deeply, her hands steady on the steering wheel. She had been taught since she was a teenager exactly how to act in moments like this: no sudden movements, stay polite, and above all, stay calm. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, keeping her voice smooth, controlled. The man outside didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned closer to her window, his eyes narrowing as if scanning her existence itself for something to accuse. A smirk slowly crept across his face. "People like you," he said coldly, "always act innocent until proven otherwise. Step out of the car." Maya's pulse quickened. Not from fear, but from anger she had long ago learned to bury beneath composure. She glanced at her dashboard clock. It was 8:47 p.m. She had just left work, still dressed in her tailored blazer, her hair neatly tied back. She looked every bit the professional woman she was. But to this officer, none of that mattered. The street was fairly quiet, but a few passing cars slowed down, their drivers rubbernecking to catch a glimpse of what was happening. Some lowered their windows slightly, curious but unwilling to involve themselves. To them, it was just another traffic stop. But Maya knew better. This wasn't about a broken taillight. It wasn't about speeding. It wasn't about any traffic violation at all. This was about prejudice. "Step out," the officer repeated, this time tapping the side of her car with his flashlight. His tone was sharp, daring her to resist. Maya slowly reached for the button to roll down her window further. Her movements were deliberate, measured. "Officer, I would be happy to comply if you could tell me what the violation is." The man scoffed. "Don't play smart. Out. Now." She could feel the weight of his authority pressing down, but she also felt something else: power. A different kind of power. The kind he didn't know she carried. Taking another deep breath, Maya opened her door and stepped out, standing tall beneath the glare of the flashing lights. Her heels clicked softly on the pavement, her calm posture contrasting sharply with the officer's aggressiveness. He circled her car, shining his flashlight unnecessarily into the windows, into the back seat, even into the trunk latch. "Where are you coming from?" he demanded. "From work," Maya replied, her voice steady. "And where exactly do you work?" His tone dripped with suspicion, as though he expected her to slip and reveal some kind of hidden crime. Maya tilted her head, allowing a small, confident smile to form. "You'll find out soon enough." The officer didn't like that answer. His jaw tightened. "Ma'am, your attitude isn't helping. You're looking at a possible obstruction charge here." Maya said nothing. She just stood silently, letting him dig his own hole deeper with every word, every baseless accusation. Because what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that the woman standing calmly before him wasn't some random driver. She wasn't a target he could intimidate into submission. She was Maya Johnson, the newly appointed head of internal affairs for the entire police department. She had spent her career investigating officers just like him, those who wore the badge as a weapon rather than a shield. Those who believed their power made them untouchable. And tonight, by sheer arrogance, he had pulled over the one person with enough authority to end his career. The irony nearly made her laugh. Instead, she straightened her blazer and fixed him with a level gaze. She didn't need to reveal her identity yet. Not here. Not under the flashing lights and the eyes of strangers driving by. No, she would let this scene play out just a little longer. She wanted to see just how far his arrogance would take him. Because this wasn't just a traffic stop. This was the beginning of his downfall. Officer Daniel Briggs wasn't just any cop, he was the kind who walked with his chest puffed out, as if the badge on his chest gave him ownership of every street, every person, and every situation. With over 15 years on the force, he had built a reputation for being tough, but anyone who looked deeper knew the truth. His toughness was only aimed at those he thought couldn't fight back. Briggs had grown comfortable in that role. For years, he had pulled over drivers who looked suspicious, knowing most wouldn't dare challenge him. If they complained, their words went into a black hole of paperwork and bureaucracy. If they resisted, they faced charges that he knew how to twist to his advantage. He was a master at making his authority look legitimate, even when it wasn't. That night, standing over Maya Johnson, he felt the same sense of control he always did. He believed he owned the situation. His smirk widened as he barked more orders, shining his flashlight in her eyes as if trying to break her calm exterior. "Open your trunk," he demanded suddenly. Maya raised an eyebrow. "Do you have probable cause?" Her question irritated him instantly. Civilians weren't supposed to know words like that, let alone use them with such confidence. "Don't test me, lady. Do it, or I'll call for backup and we'll search this vehicle top to bottom." The truth was, Briggs didn't have a single reason to suspect her of anything. But that didn't matter to him. His entire career had been built on intimidation, on bluffing people into compliance. He thrived on the nervousness in their voices, the way their hands shook as they fumbled for documents. To him, fear was the best kind of respect. But Maya wasn't giving him any. Her hands were steady, her voice calm, and her eyes unwavering. That confidence made him uncomfortable, but instead of backing down, his arrogance pushed him to double down. "Where did you say you were coming from again?" he asked, pacing slowly around her car. "From work," Maya repeated. "And where do you work?" His voice dripped with suspicion. She met his gaze and gave the same answer as before, "You'll find out soon enough." Briggs clenched his jaw. To him, that sounded like defiance. He wasn't used to defiance. Most people he stopped would be apologizing by now, desperate to be let go. But Maya's calmness felt like a challenge, and Daniel Briggs wasn't the kind of man to let a challenge slide. "You think this is a game?" he snapped. "I can have you in cuffs in 2 minutes flat." Obstruction. Failure to comply. You name it. Maya didn't flinch. "I'm sure you could," she said evenly. "But that wouldn't be wise." Her words hit him like a jab, and though he didn't fully understand why, they unsettled him. He didn't like feeling off balance, especially not in front of a woman he thought he should easily control. His pride wouldn't allow it. So he leaned in closer, lowering his voice as if to intimidate her further. "You people always think you're smarter than the law. But the truth is, out here, I'm the law." It was the same line he had used countless times before, a mantra that had kept him in power for years. To him, the badge was untouchable armor. It excused every action, every word, every abuse of power. What Briggs didn't realize, as he puffed himself up with arrogance, was that every move he made was sealing his own fate. Every baseless threat, every prejudiced word, every display of superiority was stacking up like evidence in a courtroom. And Maya was watching. Listening. Storing it all. For her, this wasn't just another encounter with a racist cop. This was a living, breathing case study. And when the time came, she would have everything she needed to tear his arrogance apart. But Briggs couldn't see that. All he saw was a woman standing too calm, too confident, and too unshaken by his authority. And that alone made him more aggressive. "You know what," he said finally, his smirk returning as he tapped her car with his flashlight, "people like you never learn until someone teaches you a lesson. Consider tonight your lesson." He thought he had just won the moment, that his intimidation had landed. But in reality, he had just written the opening chapter of his own downfall. The tension in the air was thick, almost heavy enough to touch. Officer Briggs stood with his arms crossed, waiting for Maya to break under his authority. To him, every second of silence was proof that he was winning. He had seen it countless times before. Civilians eventually cracked. They pleaded, apologized, begged for leniency. But Maya wasn't pleading. She wasn't apologizing. And most importantly, she wasn't afraid. Instead, she reached slowly into her purse. Briggs instantly tensed, his hand twitching toward his holster. "Hey! Keep your hands where I can see them," he barked. Maya froze deliberately, raising her free hand slightly to calm the situation. "Relax, officer. I'm reaching for my identification." "Do it slow," he growled, his voice sharp with paranoia. Her fingers moved carefully, pulling out not just her driver's license, but a black leather badge holder. She held it out for him to see. The flashlight beam flickered across the shiny emblem, and in that instant, everything changed. Officer Briggs's smirk vanished. His eyes widened, his jaw slackened. He stepped back instinctively, like someone had just yanked the ground from under his feet. "Internal affairs," he muttered, his voice suddenly stripped of confidence. "That's right," Maya replied, her voice steady and commanding. She flipped the badge fully open, letting the gold insignia gleam in the flashing red and blue lights. Maya Johnson, Head of Internal Affairs. Appointed last week. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the drivers passing by seemed to pause in their cars, sensing something bigger than a routine stop was unfolding. Briggs's face paled as reality sank in. He hadn't just pulled over a random woman. He hadn't just flexed his authority on an ordinary citizen. He had targeted the very person who was now responsible for investigating officers exactly like him. Maya's tone shifted, no longer the polite civilian voice she had been using minutes before. Her words carried the weight of authority that Briggs could never match. "Every action you've taken tonight," she said firmly, "every word you've spoken, every baseless threat you've made, it's all going into my official report." Briggs swallowed hard, his throat dry. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words stumbled out awkwardly. I was just doing my job." "No," Maya cut him off sharply. "You were abusing your job. You were profiling. You were threatening. And you were hoping I'd be too scared to stand up to you." Her voice echoed with a power that made the officer shrink back. The roles had flipped completely. The predator had become the prey. For the first time in his career, Briggs felt exposed. Naked. Vulnerable. The badge that had always protected him suddenly felt like a weight dragging him down. Look, I didn't mean," he stammered, searching for an excuse. "Don't bother," Maya interrupted again. "I've seen enough. And believe me, Officer Briggs, this is far from the first complaint I've heard about you. The difference is, now those complaints are coming across my desk. And I have the authority to act on them." Briggs's stomach dropped. He knew exactly what that meant. Internal Affairs wasn't like the complaints department he was used to brushing off. IA investigations were serious, thorough, and career-ending if you were on the wrong side of them. And here he was, standing face to face with the head of the division, after humiliating himself in the worst possible way. He tried again, his tone softening. "Maybe we can just forget about this. A misunderstanding, right? No harm done." Maya shook her head slowly, her expression unwavering. "This isn't a misunderstanding, officer. This is a pattern. And tonight, you proved it beyond doubt." The flashlight in his hand trembled. The once dominant figure now looked like a rookie caught in the act. His arrogance had evaporated, replaced by fear, the kind of fear he had inflicted on others for years. Maya took a step closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "You thought you were teaching me a lesson. But the only lesson being taught here is yours. Abuse of power has consequences." She closed her badge holder with a snap, tucked it back into her blazer, and stepped toward her car. Briggs stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to move. Before getting in, Maya turned back one last time. "This isn't over, officer. Not by a long shot. I'll see you soon, only next time, it won't be on the side of the road. It'll be across the table in an official investigation." Then she got into her car, started the engine, and drove away calmly, leaving Briggs standing in the flashing lights, alone with the crushing realization that his career had just taken a fatal hit. The very next morning, Maya wasted no time. She sat in her office at Internal Affairs, her badge gleaming on the desk as she opened a fresh case file with the name Officer Daniel Briggs typed neatly across the top. This wasn't just about one traffic stop. Maya knew that what she experienced was a window into something much bigger. And as head of Internal Affairs, she had the power and responsibility to pull that curtain back. Her first step was to review the officer's record. On paper, Briggs looked like a decorated veteran, 15 years of service, commendations for bravery, and several awards for community policing. But Maya knew how appearances could be manipulated. She dug deeper. That's when the cracks began to show. Dozens of civilian complaints filed against him, almost all from people of color, had been quietly dismissed or marked as unsubstantiated. Body camera footage from several arrests had conveniently gone missing. Even fellow officers had submitted anonymous concerns about his aggressive behavior, though those, too, had been buried under piles of paperwork. Maya leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. Classic cover-up, she muttered. She ordered a full review of his past cases, pulling archived footage, transcripts, and records. She personally interviewed citizens who had once been brushed aside. Their stories poured out, stories of being pulled over without cause, threatened into compliance, or arrested for minor infractions that mysteriously escalated into charges. One woman recalled, "He made me get out of my car in the rain for 30 minutes, just to teach me respect. I complained, but nothing ever happened." Another man said quietly, "He told me straight to my face, 'You people don't belong in this neighborhood.' I thought about filing a report, but I knew it would go nowhere." But now, with Maya in charge, everything was different. For weeks, she built her case brick by brick, evidence stacking higher with each passing day. The picture became undeniable. Officer Briggs wasn't just a tough cop, he was a predator hiding behind a badge. And this time, he wasn't going to slip through the cracks. The hearing room was packed. Senior officers, board members, and even community representatives filled the seats. Everyone knew this wasn't just another disciplinary case, it was about accountability. At the center sat Officer Daniel Briggs, shoulders slumped, eyes darting nervously around the room. The arrogance that once defined him was gone. No smirk, no swagger, just fear. He looked nothing like the man who had barked orders at Maya on the side of the road. Across from him sat Maya Johnson, calm and composed, a thick folder of evidence neatly stacked in front of her. This was her arena now. The proceedings began, and one by one, the evidence was laid bare. Body cam clips of aggressive stops. Testimonies from victims who finally felt safe to speak. Reports that had been ignored for years resurfaced, each one a nail in the coffin of Briggs's career. The board members listened carefully as Maya presented her findings with precision. "This isn't an isolated incident," she said firmly. "It's a pattern of misconduct that spans over a decade. Officer Briggs consistently abused his authority, targeted minorities, and used intimidation instead of justice. That ends today." Briggs tried to defend himself, muttering excuses about misunderstandings and doing his duty, but the evidence was overwhelming. Every attempt to justify his actions only made him look weaker. The room was no longer on his side, and for the first time, he knew it. Finally, the verdict was announced, guilty of repeated misconduct and abuse of authority. The punishment was severe. Briggs was stripped of his badge, his pension revoked, and his name permanently tarnished in the department's records. He would never wear a uniform again. As the ruling was read aloud, the room erupted, not in applause, but in something far more powerful, silence filled with relief. Justice had been served. Maya stood and addressed the room. "The badge is meant to protect, not oppress. If we allow corruption and prejudice to thrive in our ranks, we betray the very people we swore to serve. Today is not just about one officer, it's about sending a message. Abuse of power will not be tolerated." The board nodded in agreement. Officers in the room, some visibly emotional, knew change was finally coming. And as Briggs walked out in disgrace, Maya knew she had done more than expose a racist officer. She had lit a fire for accountability, one that would burn long after this case was closed. And that's how a racist officer's arrogance led to his ultimate downfall, exposed by the very woman he tried to intimidate. Justice was served, and accountability finally won. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss more powerful stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.